A report by think tank Civitas claims that Britain's economy has not benefited from EU membership. In fact, it suggests it's held it back. It claims that exports growth in Britain is more than 22% lower than it would have been if it had continued trading outside the single market. It also found that the exports of all 12 founding members of the trade bloc have been nearly 15% lower while operating within the single market. In comparison, it reveals the exports of non-member OECD countries to the EU are just 2.5% lower. Well, the report suggests that Britain has missed out on trillions in trade as a result of its membership. It reveals countries outside of trade blocs, including Chile, Korea, Singapore and Switzerland, have been more successful than the EU in brokering deals with other states. It calculates that the aggregate GDP of the 55 countries with an EU agreement was $6.7 trillion last year. And in contrast, the aggregate gross domestic product of all the countries Chile had agreements with was nearly $60 trillion. And as you can see, Korea, Singapore and Switzerland boast similar figures. Well, earlier I spoke to the author of that report, Michael Barrage, and he says that this data destroys the myth that British trade with the rest of the world would be harmed if it left the EU.
The data I have looked at is publicly available. It is published by OECD, World Trade Organization, World Bank and so forth. And therefore why it hasn't entered the public debate puzzles me.
And another big why is clearly countries that are trading independently seem to be a lot better off than those in a bloc. Why is that, do you think?
It's a complete surprise. We prepared a list, the top 20 exporters to the EU, treating the UK as one of them, as if it were an outsider. And the UK figures in the export of goods number 16. In the export of services, it figures as number 15. And you say to yourself, why in the export of goods should 15 non-member countries have a higher rate of growth than the UK? And why, likewise, in the export of services, should 14 non-member countries have a higher rate of growth of exports to the EU than the UK? It's very puzzling. To be honest, it deserves very, very intensive analysis and explanation.
And also, this could have a big impact, though, Michael, on the EU referendum?
It might. It might, if people recognise the significance of it, i.e., that the advantages of being a member and the disadvantages of not being a member have both been exaggerated. There are no advantages. This data suggests there are very few, no advantages of being a member, and that the disadvantages have been not being a member have been grossly exaggerated.